Okay, this is now the 5-minute tarot for the 27th of September 2017. And today I'd like to discuss how we learn to read tarot cards. And I'll tell you a couple of things, a couple of ideas about what to do or how to go about it. Because it's not just memorizing meanings, but thinking through ideas that connect to cards. Because if you remember, if you think of it this way, learning the tarot is not just when you have cards in front of you, right? So you shuffle and you pick a card and you examine the symbolism and you memorize what's there and you look at it and you think about the colors and the whole bit. So learning to read cards doesn't just take place when you've got a card in your hand or a card or a deck of cards in front of you on a table. Because if you remember the quote from a couple of days ago, I think the 23rd of September it was, I read that quote and it said, the aim of the devil is distraction. And so that statement about the devil, it doesn't have to be true. Maybe it's not true actually, but in thinking, is it true or not? I get a better understanding of what the devil represents, or what it's about, or the kinds of meanings that I might like to give if the card comes up in a reading, depending what the question is. So that quote about the devil, it can be a starting point for developing some ideas. And just I remembered a few days ago I talked about Rick Beato's channel. And he talks about improvisation. And it's sort of like you get a statement like the aim of the devil is distraction, and then you improvise on it. And improvisation comes from a word that means not having any answer to begin with. So when you improvise on the idea of the devil, the aim of the devil being distraction, you're starting with something and seeing where it leads. Because we could think that, okay, distraction sounds like it's not a desirable characteristic or a desirable trait or a desirable state. If you're distracted, you're not focused. And so distraction seems like some kind of weakness. So maybe the card shows the devil card when it comes up, it's pointing out or reminding the questioner of that they are weak or they're going to be weak in a certain area. And so a card showing where you're weak, that can be a good thing because it alerts you to where you're weak and you do something to strengthen in that area. So if we take the idea that the devil is distraction, then the opposite of distraction could be focus. So maybe the card, when it appears, points out where and when you should focus. And this is a good thing. So we can wonder what's good and what's bad, because if the devil is supposed to be a bad card, and yet it leads to something good, right? It makes you realize, okay, I'm going to be distracted. I better focus. I better make sure that I'm undisturbed for this period of time so I can come up with a better solution, or so that I can handle and do the job properly, whatever it happens to be. So if the devil is supposed to be a bad card, yet it leads to something good, or something good comes out of it, focus and concentration, is the devil really a bad card? And so if you look at it that way, it isn't a bad card. And we can realize then that if we think in terms of good and bad, we can be limiting our thinking and limiting ourselves. And maybe that's why in the Rider-Waite deck, the man and the woman are chained. It's not that they're being punished or they're being made to suffer, but they allowed themselves to be distracted, or they knew where they were weak, but they didn't do anything to help themselves. They didn't do anything to develop strength in that particular area. So the statement was that the aim of the devil is distraction. And you take that and you improvise on it and you see where your thoughts take you and what connections you make and what ideas you come up with. So two other points to make, both about the king, because Elvis Presley, as you may or may not know, he was known as the king. So maybe if we think about Elvis and his life and what he went through, it may help us to have more to say when one of the kings comes up in a spread. I'm not saying that you'll that if the King of Cups comes up, you're going to be a world-renowned singer with multiple hit songs. It's not that, but if you think about Elvis and what he was like, he had fame, so the king can represent achievement and fame and popularity and people looking up to you, and you, the king, being able to bring joy and happiness and delight into the lives of listeners or into the lives of people below you or people connected with you. So the king's function, or part of the king's duty or function or ability, can be that the king spreads lightness and light and happiness and enjoyment, because Elvis did that. But at the same time, if you think of Elvis, and there was Colonel Parker who was his manager, and Colonel Parker made these deals for Elvis to star in these terrible movies, but they sold and people went to see them because Elvis was in it. But the movies themselves were dreadful and cheesy, and Elvis didn't really develop. Maybe he couldn't develop as an actor, but it was just sort of like, it was all down to Tom Parker, who in many ways ruined Elvis. So part of maybe the king reversed can be that that somebody controls you, or somebody has a controlling say in what it is that you do. And if the king is reversed, in the same way that Colonel Parker made a lot of money for himself and his backers and maybe for Elvis, but artistically and you know, and you have to wonder if that's why Elvis, I mean, he was a Tyrian, and so he ate and drank and to excess, but maybe he was unhappy, or he was a twin, you know that he was a twin and the brother died at birth. So you can imagine about the pressure on Elvis as the only surviving twin. You know, it's kind of odd, or it's a difficult situation. Maybe that's why he overate. But, you know, other things. So anyway, I don't want to get started on Elvis, but so we've got the idea of the king. Elvis was the king, but it doesn't always go well for the king. And maybe you think if the king is reversed, then it's going to go badly, along the lines of the way it went bad for Elvis, that because he had hangers on, he had people who supported him, who would just tell him yes, whatever he wanted. And so maybe with the king reversed, you don't have somebody who's going to tell you the truth. You've got people who depend on you for an income, and they're not going to do anything to rock the boat. It's a bit like the journalists who covered the Beatles in the early days. And the Beatles in the early days, there were lots of women, loose women, and lots of drugs. But because the journalists shared in that, they didn't want to spill the beans and tell the truth about what was going on, because then it would mean that their supply of women and drugs would dry up. You know, and that can be not women and drugs, but that kind of situation with the king reversed, where you have to be careful about the people that you associate with, or the people that you give your trust to, or the people that speak in your name, because maybe they've got their own agenda that's not your agenda, or not the questioner's agenda. And then the last example is Michael Jackson was known as the king of pop. Right, so again, it's the king. So maybe we think about Michael Jackson, what he went through, what he became, how he ended up, and relate maybe some of his experiences to what it is to be a king. Because again, he was, you know, phenomenally successful and very talented. But I don't know what happened to him. But anyway, and drugs as well. Painkillers, I suppose it was. and Elvis too. But so anyway, Michael Jackson. I watched recently. I watched Thriller on YouTube. You know, the video of Thriller, and it was really dated. And I was quite surprised because I watched the Beat It and Billie Jean and the other one, Smooth Criminal. And I watched them, and they were all, even though at the time that they came out, I watched them and enjoyed them, and they seemed quite fresh and so on. Looking at them now, 20 years later, however long it was, they're kind of dated. And that makes me wonder about the King. Is it that the King is good in the moment, but we shouldn't expect him to have lasting power? And that might be something that you remember during a discussion with a questioner where a king comes up. It's not we're not supposed to memorize all this and try and explain or express all of it in any particular reading. But if you've got 50 ideas about the king and the strengths and weaknesses of the king, then as somebody asks a question and you turn a king, some thoughts or some ideas are going to come back to you, and those are the right ones to talk about. So maybe you'll do 100 spreads, and in the 101st spread that you do from now, you'll remember this point about Michael Jackson's video being dated, and you'll say to the questioner, so you're represented by the king, but it may be that you are not going to have much staying power, or maybe if it's a reverse king, that you were good in the past, but not so much now, or what you're good at normally gets results, but it won't work in this case. So with a reverse king, sometimes, or depending on the question and the questioner, it may be important to think again about how you're going to handle the situation, because if you do it your normal way, it's probably not going to work. It may have worked before, it may work in the future, but in this instance, it's not going to work. It's not going to give you the result that you want. So think again, and maybe it's going to be important either to do something else or to take what you're good at and expand it or refine it or make it better so that it will actually work. Because if you go into the situation relying on what you've already done or what you've already developed, then it's not going to give you the result that you want. So I think I'm going on long enough, and I don't want to keep going on, but I'm suggesting that if you want to learn to read cards, what you do is you keep an eye and an ear open, and remember the tarot, because you're going to get ideas from all over the place. And then when you get the idea, spend some time and do something with it. And you can take 5 minutes when you're on a bus or on a train, or waiting for somebody to call back. You know, you've got you can think about king, or a king, Elvis, Michael Jackson, whatever it happens to be, and you can ponder on, just wonder and imagine. Because think of improvisation. It's not that you know the answer and you're going to repeat it. You're sort of finding out and discovering what's there or what might be there. And then when you're supposed to say it, you remember it. Okay, that's it from me. Thanks for watching. Thumbs up. I feel like Wayne's World. Okay, thumbs up, and send me comments, and take a look at the links down below. I've got various sites and resources. Some are free, some are not free, but take a look and see what you think. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you in a couple of days. Okay, bye-bye.